All right. Audio looks good. Video looks good. I think we're ready to go. All right. Welcome, Lincoln County School District, Crestview. You're listening to K103.3. Okay, that joke is going to get old pretty fast, and it won't stop me from using it. Hi, everyone. So this video, after our meeting where me, Marina, and Yanni got to come to your school, thank you again for welcoming us and having us. It felt like there was a lot of convergence around this idea of trauma-responsive education, or at least a really strong desire and understanding that making sure that whatever practices you were implementing were informed by what we now know about trauma, its effects on children, and what some of the promising practices are in regards to responding to trauma. It felt like that was really important to everyone. And in particular, I think everyone was working on social and emotional learning with the Kelso's wheel as a potential tool for solving problems. And you mentioned several other features. So this presentation might be longer than you were expecting, only in that I assume that people can skip back and forth. I'll try and come up with timestamps so you can get to the part that you care about. And you will also have the slide deck. It belongs to you. I didn't spend time making sure this was in CI's branding. These are bits and pieces of presentations I've given before. All right, let's just dive in. All right, before we get in, just some priming to get us in the mood, get us in the right mind space around the topics here. In one word, name a character quality you think it's important for children to have. What's a character quality that you think is important for children to have? In the past, I've heard responsibility, kindness, respectful. I don't hear words like evil, selfish, rude, right? I don't hear that as a desired quality for young children or any child or any human. And I make this point because as educators, we're pretty nice people. We're kind people. We have good intentions about children and what we want them to be like. But what I do notice is oftentimes our strategies, what we're putting into place, what we're doing in our classrooms, don't always match up with the desired qualities that we want children to have. And hopefully what this video does, and anytime we're talking about social emotional learning, we always come back to this question of what are the character qualities that we think is important for children to have? And what are the strategies that we're going to put into place that help us to advance or progress towards those character qualities? Now, when we're advancing towards the desired character qualities, how we want children to be socially, emotionally, one of the things that has emerged as a very important feature of good social and emotional learning and instruction is understanding how trauma affects young children, their families, us as professionals, as educators working with young children. It has tremendous impact on us. And so we're going to use this definition here. Understanding trauma, the definition presented here is an individual and collective response to life-threatening events, harmful conditions, or prolonged stressful environments. Something that's important about this definition is that the trauma isn't the event itself, it's the impact of those events. So when we experience something, it impacts us in a way that leaves something. It stays with us. And sometimes those things are wounding and they hurt. And so it's not always helpful understanding when we kind of dive into this definition and why it's important. It's not always helpful to understand what was the event, what exactly happened to the child, right? I mean, that can give us an idea. It can give us an idea of how concerning or alarming something might be. But different children, different people will respond to those traumatic events differently. So if the reason why we're asking is what was the event? Why, what happened to the child? And then we're using that to compare it to other kids, or we're comparing it to our own life experience and saying, hey, I went through something like that. I'm good. I'm fine. It wasn't that bad for me. That may not be how the child is experiencing it or has experienced it. It could also be the culmination of various traumatic events. It could be a child's personality, their race, their language, their other aspects of their social identities could be impacting how they're experiencing the trauma. And so I felt it was important to name that here. This is a very science-y slide. I used an image that looks very science-y because we're about to talk about the brain real quick. There's this idea that's really important. Ever since probably 30, 40 years ago, we started to be able to attach cathodes, things, onto the head to measure electrical impulses based on certain inputs or certain experiences that we were going through. And one of the things that they found, because they can measure electrical impulses, is that when a child or a human, anybody, is witnessing something, their brain will fire off certain neurons as if they were experiencing that event themselves. So, for example, a child might be witnessing an argument or someone doing something joyful, something playful, and their brain will be firing off the same kinds of signals as if they were experiencing that themselves. And so there's this idea that our neurons, right, and how we're kind of connected to other people is kind of contagious, right? And that's important because it's when we're understanding trauma and trauma-informed practices, it's not just about what happened to the child. It's also about understanding everyone around them. They're adults in their lives. You're an important adult in their life. And what are the signals that we're sending? What are the emotions that we're queuing up? And one of the emotions that, or kind of, just the mannerisms that we think is really important to convey in a trauma-responsive, trauma-informed practice is calmness, right? Calmness and peace and predictability, and we'll get into that. So if we add to the child's stress, right, which is something I've done, we probably all have done, we're doing the best we can, and sometimes we get stressed, or we see something and it stresses us out, or the culmination of things going on in our lives makes us stressed out, right? We run the risk of creating toxic stress. Now let's get into this idea of toxic stress. So a bunch of smart people at Harvard, they categorized certain levels of stress that people were having. What they were measuring was cortisol levels. It's a chemical that the brain releases. And when there's a certain threshold of cortisol in our blood, they kind of put it in these three categories here. There's a positive level of stress, a tolerable level of stress, and there's toxic stress. Now, a positive level of stress might be, I'm working out and my body is, I'm releasing some cortisol. I'm stressing out a little bit, but it's positive. It's actually helping to kind of work with other bodily functions. It's queuing up certain things in my heart rate that makes things healthy for me. It's a positive level of stress. Then there's tolerable stress, right? Where we're experiencing stress, but we have some way or strategy or some mitigating factor that helps us to tolerate it in a way that doesn't really affect us long term. It won't change us or leave a mark, as I was saying before, right? And what they have found about what are the elements that make stress tolerable, what they have found to be incredibly, probably most primarily important, is supportive relationships. In particular, with young children, supportive relationships with adults is really important. I was about to dive into a lecture on secure attachment, but that will be another slide deck if you're interested. Then there's this idea of toxic stress, which is so much stress and it's prolonged, so it's going on for a long time, and there aren't positive relationships, or there aren't enough positive relationships to counteract all of that stress. And it's gotten to a level that's so intense and it's so long that it not only does it kind of leave a mark for the future, it affects us in the present. We'll have, for instance, some of the symptoms that they've noticed around toxic stress is gastrointestinal issues. It'll affect our digestion. It'll affect our development and our brain development. It'll affect our physical well-being, right? In so many different ways. There's a long list of all the kind of symptoms that come up when we experience lots and lots and lots of stress. So this is about excess cortisol that we have in our bodies. And so sometimes the way those kind of adverse experiences and the way our stress represents in behaviors, like how do children respond to that, some of those behaviors are internalized. So it's like anxiety, depression. I'll raise my hand. I deal with that. I'm living with anxiety and depression. I work with a therapist, and I do some breathing strategies and exercise and things. And I don't exercise enough, but I exercise, try and get myself on track there, right? And then there's externalizing behaviors, right? Like aggression, attention problems, screaming, hitting, kicking, yelling, spitting, running, right? Those externalizing behaviors, those are the ones we tend to focus on. I'm naming this here because it's also important to pick up on children who have behaviors that are more internalizing, which often go unseen or not responded to in schools. So I just wanted to name that. All right. There's a lot more to talk about in terms of stress, trauma, toxic stress, and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to give an overview there. And here's our that's our first chapter here. And here's our second chapter here. So what is this? Now that we have kind of an understanding of trauma and how it affects us, what are some of the kind of issues that come up when we have so much trauma in our lives? What does that mean for educators? What does it mean for teaching? And what does it mean for a classroom? And what a classroom can be, how it can be designed, how it should feel, how do we respond to certain behaviors? And what I'm going to do today is share a small sample of some of those ideas. There are many, many that are out there. But we wanted to give a taste, including some of the ones that we mentioned to you the last time we were there. So there's one of the important shifts as an educator is shifting from punishment to supporting children. I cannot stress this enough. This is probably the most important aspect of trauma-informed teaching. Shifting from punishment to support. Now, there are a variety of things that educators and the education system does that, as we've worked in our schools, we may not have thought they were punishments, right? We thought they were helpful, that they were supportive. But let's kind of dive into that a little bit. A suspension, that's a punishment, right? That's a reaction saying, you did something, now here is the punishment. It's an external sort of motivating action taken against the child that is intended to motivate the child. We will not go into what is motivation. That's another presentation. I'd love to talk about it with you. Expulsion, that's a punishment. Sending a child somewhere because they did something, that's a punishment. Sometimes we use the threat of a punishment to control or to try and get a child to calm down or to stop a behavior. So we'll say, if you don't stop, I'm gonna send you to the office. So that threat is a form of a punishment, in that it's an external, I guess, action, right, taken against the child to that is intended to discipline them, right? Whereas support is a way where we are responding to children in a way that understands and empathizes with their situation, their circumstances, their context, what they're experiencing, and we respond with kindness, love, attention, support, right? The way, if you think of, when I ask you, what would you see or what would you experience sorry, let me slow down. How would you want to be supported? What are the kinds of things that you would want other people to do in order to feel supported, right? So that's an important shift that we would think about here. Another important shift in trauma-informed teaching is that we're addressing the cause of the behaviors, not just the behavior itself. So while the behavior itself is important, it gives you important clues and it gives you important understandings, it's pretty incomplete. It's not a full picture of what's going on with the child. Again, knowing that certain responses to trauma or stress can be really concerning behaviors, externalizing behaviors. Addressing the causes are what's important. Now, I don't mean that it's part of our jobs as classroom teachers to go into homes and change how parenting is done and fix the home routine and all that stuff, right? Again, we can support that. We can work in partnership with families and support that. But what I mean is, what is the underlying issue that the child is expressing, and how can we support them within the domain of a classroom that can address what they're trying to communicate? So for example, I was once working with a child where when she was stressed, she would tear up everything in front of her. She would get very frustrated with her art, with anything she was her writing, anything she was working on. She would tear it all up, scream, throw it on the ground, shove other things off of the shelf. And that was the behavior. Very, very concerning behavior, very disruptive behavior, right? But if I was responding only to the behavior, then I would be doing things like, well, now you got to clean it up, or now you got to redo that thing, or, okay, I'm going to punish you for that behavior, or, if you don't stop, then I'm going to do this to you, right? And we're just responding to the behavior. Whereas in trauma-informed teaching, we're trying to understand what was not only the trigger, right? But we do want to understand what was the trigger, right? So for this child, it was frustration. She was getting frustrated at how imperfect her work was. And for some kids, frustration tolerance is a very difficult skill to master, right? And so, but we know that that was the cause. Frustration tolerance. How can we build up that skill? How can we work on that, right? And that does feel like it's within the domain of education that we can affect and influence. We can teach strategies. I can show a child how to communicate frustration. So again, since we're in this example, I taught the child a bug and a wish. It bugs me when my drawing isn't perfect. I wish you would help me. I wish someone would be with me while I did this, right? And so that strategy, I taught them a bug and a wish. They were able to communicate that. Okay, I'm going pretty slow, and I don't know. It feels okay. The music is chill. I'm relaxed. Let's just keep going. It's a video. You can skip ahead if you're bored. Okay, practices focused on the following: relational connection, predictability, and empowerment. So in trauma-informed teaching, we would focus on relational connection, and let's go through each one here. Relational connection is not something that is typically focused on in teaching, right? When we're teaching, we tend to focus on a standard or a particular literacy goal or reading goal. Not to say that those things aren't important. They're incredibly important to opening up opportunities for children and families, right? But we also need to think about how are we creating positive relationships for children. So this could be between you and the child. So your relationship with the child matters a lot. Maybe I should have gone into that lecture on secure attachment and how you are a secondary attachment figure, maybe even the primary attachment figure for many children, right? But that relational connection with you is really important. And with each other, positive relationships is really important to young children and becomes increasingly important as children get older. Their idea of belonging, like, do I belong? Am I part of this group? And significance. Am I important within this group? Am I a contributor? Am I worthy? Am I worthy and worthwhile of this group, right? Belonging and significance. If those things aren't part of the relationships that children are having, that will be really hard to have any sort of positive experience in general in school if those conditions aren't being met. Thinking about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I would add this to that bottom tier of like, these are things that humans need. Predictability, really important in trauma-informed teaching. Knowing that children's lives outside of the classroom might be really unpredictable, really shocking, really concerning, and they don't know or they can't predict or can't schedule when those things are going to happen. I'm laughing and I shouldn't, but I've seen some stuff. It's predictability in the classroom, and creating structure is really good. Now there's a limit, right? If it's overly structured, if it's overly kind of constricting or constraining, then we don't get at this third area, which is empowerment, right? Giving children some sense of autonomy and agency where they can kind of leave their imprint on the world, right? How would you feel in the world if you didn't feel like anything you did mattered, right? Anything you did wasn't going to have an impact, wasn't going to change anything. And how often do young children in general, how often do they feel like that, right? And it's particularly important for children experiencing trauma. This last bullet point here, your emotion, I should have capitalized it. Your emotional state and response is important. Your emotional state and response is important. And what I mean by that is I'm referencing back to that idea of mirror neurons, where your emotional state is going to have an impact on young children. If you're stressed, they'll feel that stress, right? If you're happy, they'll feel that happiness. Not that you need to be happy, right? But it helps sometimes, you know. What most important in terms of your emotional state is calmness, peace, calmness. The other thing about your emotional state and response that's really important from your point of view and from an administrative point of view is when you get into the world of trauma-informed practices, there's a lot of attention to self-care and how teachers are experiencing trauma themselves. They're experiencing trauma in the classroom, you know, when they're engaging and working with young children and families. And so that idea of self-care is really important. Now, most people, when I see, okay, Subin said self-care is important, we need to do some self-care, and they'll do like 30 minutes of yoga at one staff meeting or something, which is great. Yoga's great. Yoga's awesome. It helps a lot. But 30 minutes, weigh that against how much trauma people are experiencing and feeling, right? It's going to be more than 30 minutes of yoga. It's going to be an overall approach and understanding that you need to take breaks, that you need to have a healthy environment around you, that you need positive relationships too, to nurture you, to respond to you, right? And so those are things that you can build. And if you have a loving, affirming community, that could be something you build and lean on within the school. All right, I spent a long time on that slide, but there was a lot to talk about. All right, we talked about executive functioning, and I'm gonna kind of skip over this because when I asked you about this, everyone said, you know, oh, I'm gonna use this trick here. Okay, so executive functioning is this idea that your hand, or not executive, there is a useful trick to understanding executive functioning. It's using our hand. So our hand, our arm is kind of like the brain stem, right? And it kind of extends up into our thumb here. And this aspect of our brain is really about our, our primitive functions, fight, flight, freeze, right? And when you fold it over, this is all like the squiggly parts of our brain, all the outer layers that you usually see when people draw images of the brain, right? And this part right here where our fingernails are is our prefrontal cortex. Or I'm sorry, our prefrontal cortex. And that part of our brain is responsible for our executive functioning. Now, here's some things to know about the hand model and the brain and the prefrontal cortex and why that matters for young children, right? So executive functioning is all our higher order thinking skills, right? So writing, verbal language comprehension, right? So when someone talks, do I understand the words coming out of their mouth, right? That's part of executive functioning. Problem solving, abstract reasoning, symbolic thinking, all the things that we want to work on as teachers is part of executive functioning, right? So it's really important that we are regulated, because what happens when a child has a stressful moment in school or at home, but in school, let's say they go through something stressful, they will flip out. They will flip out and their brain will be out of whack. It will be like a literal electrical storm happening within their brain. And they are flipped, they have lost control, they have lost their verbal comprehension, their language, their problem solving. And at the same time, I can't tell you how many times I've seen adults, teachers, while a child is flipping out saying, you better go apologize, or you got to do that, or they're full on giving a lecture to the child, right, during that moment. And that's not the time. They can't hear you. They're not connected to you. They don't know what you're saying. That's not the right time, right? And so I really loved that Kelsey was focused on that. I'm going to skip this. I really love that Kelsey was talking about executive functioning and that Sandy was talking about the Cozy Cove, because if a child is having a stress response and they're flipping out, right? The only thing that matters in that particular moment while the flipping out is happening is the child has to calm down. That's the only thing that matters. Once the child is calmed down, then you can lecture them. No, I'm joking. Lecturing never works, right? Once the child has calmed down, that's when you can teach. That's when you can connect. That's when you can respond, right? And one of the character qualities that's really important for me is responsibility. I want the child to be responsible for things that have happened. And there's a way to do that that feels good for everyone. And we're going to go into that in a little bit. But in regards to helping the child to calm down, because at this point, everyone says, oh, Subin, sounds great, sounds lovely. Never going to happen. Have you ever seen my child, this child that I work with? No, I haven't. You're right. I haven't. And I've seen a lot of stress responses. I've seen a lot of situations. I've worked with teachers who've described some really, 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 really concerning things. And you're right. I haven't seen your particular situation. But I've given this advice, what you're seeing here on this slide, to a lot of different people. And they've all found some level of success with it. Not perfect, 100 for 100 success, but some level of success. So I think of it in 3 phases. First of all, if there's a child who flips their lid often, in fact, when we were in the meeting, some of you were saying, yeah, we have some kids who do that, right? There's a few things about that. First of all, it's relatively predictable, right? You have an idea what those triggers might be. What are the situations or emotional states, or maybe you know something went on at home that is going to impact the child. You can kind of predict and expect when those things are going to happen. Before the actual stress response happens, that's when a lot of the work needs to be done. Planning beforehand, right? So the first thing is, what are the things that you need to help yourself calm down? Because your emotional state is going to be really important in that moment. If you're stressed, you're just escalating things with the child. It's not helping them to calm down, right? So what are the things that help you to calm down? I learned an interesting trick from a therapist where I hold my finger tightly, my point here, let me do this thing. I hold my finger tightly. I hold it up against my chest. I squeeze and I look for the pulse in my finger, which is very hard to feel in your finger. And I breathe. And I'm just focused on that. And then I'm in the present, I'm in the moment. I open my eyes and I realize, okay, I'm back in this crappy circumstance, but at least I'm connected, I'm grounded, I'm in the present. I'm not thinking about the future, right? I'm not thinking about other things. I'm right here. I'm right here in this moment. That's an important strategy for me, right? But what will help you? So another thing about planning beforehand is what's going to help the child safely calm themselves. So for young children, the strategies can be pretty simple, right? Like I've used picture books of the family, right? So the family had some pictures that help them to calm down. They might have his favorite stuffy or a blanket, and if they can just sit in their cubby or in a quiet place, they will calm themselves down. It's like magic sometimes. Not every child responds in that way, right? And in fact, most children don't really respond in that way. And okay, but there's a way to talk to children beforehand, before the stress ever happens, right? How do we calm down? There's another aspect of this, that there's a participatory conversation. And what I mean is you literally just ask the child, what are some things that help you to calm down, right? I notice sometimes we get really upset. I get upset. And here's something that helps me. You can tell them what helps you, right? I build keyboards. You see all these keyboards in the back. That helps me to calm down. What's going to help this kid? They might be able to articulate it really well. Most children won't, but some do. Some will tell you, right? That conversation will only really be successful if you have an existing positive relationship with the child. So if that's not there, and then you try having this conversation with the child, and you're telling me, oh, the child responded really poorly to you asking that question, then I have questions about what is the contents of your relationship with the child. Is it positive in general, right? Um, I've noticed even with kids that have really significant, big trauma responses, stress responses, big emotional outbursts, when they're not doing that, I have a lovely relationship with them, right? So that's something to aim for. Okay, in the moment, this is where I spend the most time. In the moment when a child is flipping out, they're hitting, spitting, kicking, tearing, throwing things, right? Flipping tables, something like that. You are a teacher. You're responsible for 20, I don't know, however many children, right? I kind of first focus on everyone else's safety, and over time the kids get used to this. They get used to this idea, and I say, let's give her some space. Let's give her some. And so I'm talking to everyone else because the other child's not connected with me. They're flipping out. I'm not talking to them right now. Let's give them some space. And I'm really I might do this. I'm focused on my calmness. How do I get calm? Okay. And I'm using very few words, and I'm really focused on my face, right? Which again, they might not pick up on, but I'm using as few cues as possible to indicate that I love this child and that you can come back when you're ready. So that what that looked like for me was, and I'm like, I will hug you when you're ready, right? You can come when you're ready. Or, important to get low. Or I might do something like this. I've done this before. Are you okay? You good? Right? And it'll take them a while, especially in the beginning, especially if there's a lot of stress. It might take them 20 minutes. I've experienced that, 20 minutes before they calm down, right? Sometimes it takes 5 minutes. It just depends on where they are in their development. By the way, pop quiz. How many of you know when the the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain, it's the last part of the brain to develop? At what age is it fully mature? Anyone know? The answer is 20s, in your early 20s. It's the last part of your brain is not fully developed until you're in your early 20s. So I say all that to say you're screwed. No, it's good to know that for a lot of children, this is it's a developmental stage that they're in. We should expect it. We should know that this is going to happen. Okay? So once the child has reconnected with you, that's the important thing, reconnection. It's not about punishing at that point. Yeah, they did some gnarly stuff. They did some concerning stuff, right? But once they're reconnected, then we have a conversation about what's going to happen next, right? Because at first, I want you to just fold them in with love. I want to give them love. I want to give them kindness, maybe even some praise around, wow, you're back. You're back. I missed you. Come here. Hey, you did it. You did it. You calmed down. That was hard. I know how hard that was for you. You did it, right? And at that point, it's about problem solving. So, there's a pretty big mess in here. What should we do? What should we do? It's a pretty big mess, And I usually wait. This is the hardest part. Wait for the response, right? Because we want to empower them. Remember that? We want to empower them. You can come up with the solutions that help yourself. You can help yourself. You can do it, right? What should we do? And they'll come up with a very flawed, illogical thing. Like, teacher, you can clean it up. I've had a kid say that to me. You can clean it up. Because they're looking at the huge mess that they just made. You can do it, teacher. I'm like, But they tried. They tried. They came up with a solution. It was flawed. But that's when you can then follow up with your own. How about we clean it up together? I'll take this side, you take that side. You want to do that? All right, let's go. I'm with you, right? And just the fact that you're doing that together, reconnection. You're reconnecting with the kid. Okay. This video is a lot longer than I planned it to be, but hopefully you're getting something out of it. Cozy Cove, something you discussed, something you shared, something that Sandy was already doing. I saw a great Cozy Cove in her classroom, right? And here are some different ideas of how that Cozy Cove can work. I don't love cardboard boxes because when you're talking about a child in a stress response, right? I can see that getting kind of ripped up pretty easily, no matter how much duct tape you use. See some red and blue duct tape here, right? So I don't love cardboard boxes, but I know that's a very inexpensive, easy way to get started with a Cozy Cove. What's important is that we're turning off sensory cues to the child and giving them a true space to just calm down. I've seen the corner. I use this picture to talk about corners in classroom. I see them often underutilized. They are the best places to design interesting things around in the classroom. And the corner is a great place to do Cozy Cove, right? Without any furniture around. Oh, I'm using my mouse. Without any furniture around it, right? And then there are big purchasable things. This is something I had in a classroom once, and it was very useful. As we were talking about before, it's important not to send children to the Cozy Cove as a punishment, right? It's not a threat, right? So we don't say, if you don't calm down, I'm going to send you to the Cozy Cove, because then it loses all meaning and purpose of the original tension, which is here is a place where you can calm down or reconnect with the classroom. Because sometimes someone does that flip out, right? So while they're flipping out, I might be kind of prodding, poking them towards the Cozy Cove, right? Which may or may not work. They might pick up on that cue and say, okay, I can calm down here, right? Most kids won't. But it's more about the moment right after the issue has happened and they need a place to take a breath. I guarantee you, if they have flipped out and they just had a huge tantrum or something like that, they're exhausted. They are tired. They might even need a snack. Get them some water, right? And so Cozy Cove can be useful for that. Okay. Wow, long video. Chapter 3, Peace Table. The Peace Table for me, I'm responding here directly to Malaya. The Peace Table for me was the culmination of a variety of social emotional tools and kits that I was putting in the classroom. And this, what you're seeing here in this particular image, is a photo of the launch of the Peace Table in 1 year of my classroom. And this was the role play that we did to kind of initiate the Peace Table, which should, what I mean, the reason why I bring that up is that it takes a long time to build up to children being able to do the Peace Table. Like you have to teach all of those different elements first, and then the Peace Table, or at least the way I implemented it, the Peace Table was the final piece. Okay. Wow, look at that picture. I was thin. I used to ride fixed gear bikes and wear skinny jeans and ride around town. Okay. There were 3 primary tools that I was using. One is the Seaful feeling faces, emotional literacy, right? Looks like this, or the various combinations. You can cut them up, you can laminate them, you can turn them into different cards, and it teaches emotional literacy, frustration, embarrassment, sad, etc., etc. You can have the kids draw their own feelings. That's actually a pretty good way to assess, right? Emotional literacy, and kind of get a sense of what's of how they understand emotions. What's important isn't the faces on these cards. It's can they read somebody's face? So if I go like this, can they read my face? Do they know how I feel right now? Right? Or if I'm right? What is that? What is that emotion? How am I feeling right now? So it's a way to provoke curiosity. I'll say to kids, hey, look at my face. What do you think I'm feeling right now? They might say, teacher, do you have to go to the bathroom? No, but But that's a way to kind of teach emotional literacy. There's also plenty of books, young children's books, and you want to get kids practicing it with each other, right? Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to go here. You can get kids to practice it with each other. Oh, look at her face. What is she feeling? Oh, do you need the feelings kit? Let's look at the feeling. What do you think it is? And then both kids start looking at the cards, right? And they're like, oh, what feeling is that? I'm that one. I'm that. No, shh, don't give her the answer. Let her figure it out. And so they're figuring out the feelings kit, right? Okay. The second thing, which you're using your own version, whether it's the PBIS solution kit, which is what I'm using here, or it could be the Kelso's wheel, which is another version of a solution kit. So here's the solution kit that I used, right? And it's very common in PBIS schools to be using this solution kit with young children. And I would cut these up, laminate them, put them onto a ring clip thing, right? And carry it around everywhere. And if children were experiencing a problem and they needed ideas for solutions, I'd hand them the solution kit and say, hey, you can go use this. And they did. So here's an example right here. What do you think the problem is in this picture? What was the problem that they were experiencing? Let's see if you can spot it. Okay. Puzzle time is over. Who has all the beads? And one kid is saying, I only have this many. And so she started crying. And so I said, okay, it seems like we need a solution to this. And she couldn't come up with anything. So I said, oh, here's the solution kit. Let's see if some of these work. And so she finally chose one. Ask nicely. Okay, let's ask her for some beads. Let's see if that works. And it worked. She asked nicely, it worked. Not all solutions are that easy or simple, right? But it was a good rep for them. Remember we were talking about at-bats? You want to give them lots of chances? That was a swing and a hit, right? She got it, that one. Okay. And then there's this third tool that I used, which was an adaptation of collaborative problem solving from Think Kids, or Ross Green is another guy who talks about this. And so let me talk through this. So I would teach kids a process to problem solving. And yeah, it looks like a bunch of steps. And yes, these are 4-year-olds. They can do it, right? They did it. I would have to coach them. And it took many, many months. But by January and February, I didn't have to coach them. They would just go to the piece table and they would go through the steps of problem solving. Okay, so step 1 to problem solving. And this one's for the adult. Calm down and breathe. This one's for you. Calm down and breathe. Emotional state, finger hold, whatever it works. Whatever works for you. Calm down and breathe. Okay, now you talk to the children. Second step. How do you feel right now? How does that make you feel, right? Because usually you're seeing something and they're in the middle of arguing, right? They're in the middle of some fighting, right? How does that make you feel? So tell him how you feel, right? So I'll point to the kid. No, don't tell me. Tell him how you feel right now, right? And so I feel angry. Right? Oh, you feel angry. Okay, now you. How do you feel? And, well, I feel sad, right? So they're telling each other. Tell them, not me. So they tell each other how they feel. Okay, now that they've told each other how they feel, here's a little trick that happens within that. When they're naming and reconnecting to emotions, they are now connected to you. They can now listen to you and hear you. So now here's a question. What's the problem? What happened here? What's going on? Usually we start with that question, right? But not here. We start with emotional state, right? So once we've covered emotional state, what's the problem? What's going on? He has the green marker and I want the green marker. And then the other kid says, well, he had the green marker before and now I get to use it and I'm not done with it, right? So they start to yell at each other, right? And so without focusing on that, I don't care about that, right? What I'm going to focus on is, oh, it seems like both of you want the green marker at the same time. So I restate the problem in a way that feels productive and it feels solvable. It sounds like both of you want the green marker at the same time. What ideas do we have for a solution? I love that. What ideas do we have for a solution? Because I don't know. I don't have any ideas. What's your idea? This is a very tough one. This is very hard, right? I want to empower them. I want to teach them. Usually at this moment, it's the teacher who's saying, Sam, you use it first, then Henry, okay? Use it for 5 minutes. Here's the timer. Here's the sand timer. 5 minutes. You use it. You're done. Use it. I hate the sand timers. This is my personal pet peeve. I hate the sand timers. How is that real life, right? If I'm using something, if I'm at the office and I'm using the printer, right? And someone says, hey, I need to use the printer. And then they just go, bam, they put the 5-minute timer down. Be done in 5 minutes, right? I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll go as fast as I can, right? It's not real life, right? I hate those little timers. It's not how people solve problems, right? So, okay, going back to their story. How should we solve this? And they're going to come up with really, really awful ideas for how to solve the problem. Some of them will be pretty selfish, right? A child might say, okay, how about I use the green marker forever and you go home? I've heard that. I've literally heard that before, right? I use the green marker, you go home. Or I'll use the green marker and you can use the black marker, right? Doesn't solve the problem, right? And then I'll ask the other kid, because usually, again, the teacher will say, no, here's what we're going to do, right? Which you've robbed them of their at-bat. You've robbed them of their opportunity, right? How do you feel about that idea? That makes me angry, right? Oh, okay, well, what's your idea? And they'll just go back and forth. Really bad ideas. Back and forth. You'll use Kelso's wheel, right? They'll go through all of them. Let's try that one. Let's try that one. Let's try that one. Oh, do you agree? Do you agree? Right? And they usually won't agree, and you'll just keep going, right? The point is they're practicing this idea of problem solving. You're teaching them. You're coaching them on problem solving. They're learning how to solve problems in that moment. So usually we see that as a disruption to teaching, but this is teaching. We're teaching right now. So, we can't move on. Last step. We can't move on until we agree on a solution, right? The important aspect of this is the process of problem solving, not just the solution. I don't even care most of the time around what the solution is, as long as both of them agree to it, right? So that's how I use the peace table. That was a place for them to have all the toolkits and for them to have time and space for them to work it out, right? And they used it all the time. This movie's a little long, but you should watch this video, which was the role play, where the kids can show you how they use the peace table. This was the launch event, remember? I love this story because these two kids were working it out at the peace table, and these two kids needed to work it out a fair amount. And one time, the girl in the yellow sweater there, their parents were going through something, and she said, Mommy, Daddy, here's the peace table. First, tell them how you feel. And she walked them through it. This is great for us as adults too. Obviously, we wouldn't need to pull out the cards and everything like that, but if we kind of generalize those steps and we apply them in our own life, it's real life, right? It's very functional, works very effective. Here's a link to all of the different tools. They are free. You can download them. You can use them. There are other stuff in there that I did not use. Here's all the links to everything else that I used to develop this slide deck. Although, of course, it doesn't have my photos. I will send the link to this slide deck to you. And this is the longest video in America. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to hearing about change ideas you might be developing through this inspiration. And I can't wait to see what you come up with. All right, take care. Bye.